From the European Parliament in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thanks for joining us. This is what we have on the program: Brexit Breakdown. German Chancellor Angela Merkel tells Boris Johnson a deal is overwhelmingly unlikely. Syria threat: the U.S. decision to abandon an ally in Syria, could it put Europeans at risk? Sharing the burden: what a new proposal for migration would mean for countries on the front lines. Royal no more: why Sweden's king is removing 5 of his grandchildren from the royal house. And birthday break: Vladimir Putin turns 67 and celebrates with a photographer in tonight's Raw Moment. All right, it is time to meet our panelists this evening. We have Darren McCaffrey, our political editor. Darren, what are you watching?
I almost want to take 2 of them because I love the royal austerity story. But Syria and the Kurds and Turkey and the United States, a big story, profound consequences for the region, potentially for us here in the West, and open up very deep divisions within the Republican Party in the States. The question is, will Trump actually go through with it?
Indeed, and the impact is massive as well on different fronts. All right, also joining us, Svenja Hahn, a German MEP with the Renew Group. What about you, Svenja?
Well, those are all brilliant stories to follow up on. But I'm, of course, as a German MEP, I'm following the situation between Mr. Johnson and Ms. Merkel.
Indeed. OK. And also with us, Robert Rowland, a British MEP with the Brexit Party. What about you? What are you watching?
Obviously Brexit, that goes without saying. And then obviously some comments on Syria as well.
Right. OK. Well, we will begin with Brexit tonight with a potential breakdown in Brexit talks as the blame game is heating up. A phone call between Angela Merkel and Boris Johnson hit deadlock today. That's according to the UK government, who claimed that the German Chancellor told Mr. Johnson that a Brexit deal is, quote, overwhelmingly unlikely. Well, Downing Street also claims that Mrs. Merkel said a deal would never be possible unless Northern Ireland stayed in a customs union. But UK opposition says it's, quote, yet another cynical attempt by Number 10 to sabotage the negotiations, end quote. Well, the European Commission said that the Brexit talks are continuing. Well, for more on this, let us go to our correspondent, Vincent McAviney, who is standing by for us in London. Vincent, so how do we read this statement by the UK government on the conversation that happened between the 2 leaders?
Good evening, Tessa. Well, this has caused a lot of disquiet because this statement has come out. There's been a lot of briefing in the past 24 hours, including text sent to a magazine editor, which very much put the blame at Leo Varadkar, the Irish Prime Minister, saying that Berlin actually wants to do a deal. Then this morning, this statement has come out and they've said that the EU is willing to torpedo the Good Friday Agreement and was essentially demanding a veto. Now, this has caused a lot of disquiet here amongst MPs. Members of the government this morning were apparently very unhappy with the communications that were going out last night blaming Leo Varadkar. They were in the cabinet this morning and didn't realise this readout had also gone out against Angela Merkel. And so they are not happy with what the Prime Minister has been saying. But the Prime Minister is saying that you have to listen to him, not those around him who are briefing this out. So many people stepping back and looking at this, seeing a government trying perhaps to make it look like they're doing everything possible, but actually wanting to stick to their main plan of going out without a deal, but doing this just simply for the domestic audience here in the UK.
I think that's really the analysis that some people have been pointing out. But what do you think this has, this has any impact on the kind of support that MPs will give Boris Johnson on whatever deal he presents to them?
Well, one person to watch, I think, is Julian Smith, an MP and the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. He has gone directly against what was being briefed out last night, saying, I am clear that any threat on withdrawing a security cooperation with Ireland is unacceptable. This is not in the interest of Northern Ireland or the Union. So that is a bit of a warning shot to Downing Street. He is someone that we've been having on watch for a little while now as a possible resignee. So we will see what he decides to do today. But in Parliament, there have been clashes between Labour, the shadow Brexit Secretary, Sir Keir Starmer, and Michael Gove as well, because they've put out more no-deal planning. But Sir Keir Starmer has basically said it's Parliament's fault, it's opposition's fault, it's the Benn Act, it's Germany, it's Ireland. He's been listing all the people that the government has been blaming for its failure and saying that Boris Johnson never takes responsibility and that he is now playing a reckless game. So the opposition parties still trying to figure out amongst themselves who could lead any caretaker government. Amber Rudd, the former Home Secretary, has been on the airwaves. She has resigned from her party and made it clear that for the independent Conservatives now, they couldn't put Jeremy Corbyn into number 10 Downing Street. So as Parliament heads to another prorogation, the opposition parties are trying to decide how to take on number 10.
All right, thanks for that, correspondent Vincent McAviney there. Robert, I'll start with you. When we talk about potential breakdown of talks, is this the most honest assessment we've had so far, or is this spin to gain an advantage?
Well, we're in the final week now, essentially, so we're going to, what's going to be on display is the maximum amount of spin and briefings. This release this morning from 10 Downing Street has got Dominic Cummings' fingerprints all over it. It is if you like, a riposte to a rejection, obviously, that Angela Merkel has made to try and keep Northern Ireland within the customs union and the single market. Now, the offer that was last week was just to keep in the single market and remove the backstop. So this, if you like, is an attempt by Angela Merkel, if we're, if we're correct in what we've been reading, that this is an attempt to really force the United Kingdom to remain within the customs union or separate Great Britain from the United Kingdom or from Northern Ireland. So it is a way to, again, to weaponise the issue. And I think at heart here is an attempt to, divide... To get an upper hand, in a way. Get an upper hand and to divide Parliament and try and get this thing towards, the Benn Act, which will obviously then force a delay.
I think we just, on what apparently Angela Merkel said. First of all, we only have number 10's version of this. Berlin have refused to comment on it. Not many people here, and indeed anyone who knows Angela Merkel, says if you actually read apparently what Downing Street have put out, it does not sound like Angela Merkel.
That's what I wanted to ask.
She's normally quite diplomatic
like her,
to the tip. And on this idea about kind of Northern Ireland have to remain inside the customs union as opposed to the rest of the United Kingdom, if that's what the EU is calling for, you could argue that is completely unacceptable to any sovereign government, that somehow they would allow another jurisdiction to have a say over a part of their country, which is where we would end up. But also, don't be in any doubt that the UK government also opposes the backstop. And where has the backstop got support, according to opinion polls? In Northern Ireland itself. So we've ended up in this ludicrous situation. But what's more ludicrous is that the talks are, without, I think, any doubt now, going to fail. And yet, Britain's chief negotiator is here in Brussels today, right now, still pretending to negotiate.
According to the Commission, the talks are continuing, quote unquote. What about you, Svenja? What's your reading on this? Because we, again, as Darren said, we don't have the German government's official version on what actually transpired.
Mr. Johnson really needs to stop this Brexit blame game. It is the situation we have, this Brexit chaos, is not the fault of the Irish leader nor the German leader. It's the lack of leadership and it's the struggling relationship with facts of Mr. Johnson that led to this chaos. And a reliable government issues official statements, not works with sources of phone calls with leaders. This is not how a government should operate. We need clarity, and Mr. Johnson is really not giving the clarity.
But do you feel that it is close to a breakdown? Well,
the EU always said they're still open. The Commission just today issued, in fact, we're expecting to have talks today in the next days. This is what I mean with structuring relationship with facts. And I need more leadership. The EU needs more leadership from Mr. Johnson and sticking to the truth and be actually willing to negotiate, because it's only 23 days left.
And it's funny, you bring up the blame game. That's what many people, in fact, are reading into this, and not least of which is the EU Council President Donald Tusk. He reacted to the UK government's account of that phone call, and he was saying, quote, "What's at stake is not winning some stupid blame game. At stake is the future of Europe and the UK, as well as the security and interests of our people. You don't want a deal, you don't want an extension, you don't want to revoke. Quo vadis, where are you going?" is what Donald Tusk there says. Pretty strong words from Donald Tusk.
Well, exactly, they are strong words, but again, there's this posturing going on right now. I think that, as far as I can tell, from our understanding, is that Dominic Cummings is really taking the government to the point of the no deal. Boris Johnson's opinion poll ratings keep going up. So in terms of his position of Parliament versus the people, it continues to work. We, of course, want him to do a clean break Brexit, a no deal, in a different way of saying it. And our view is that by bringing back the Northern Ireland backstop, you're essentially trying to divide the United Kingdom, which is absolutely unacceptable.
So where does this where does this end? In fact, if neither one wants to budge, you say the EU is open, but in fact they don't want to move. What do you mean by the EU is still open to what? What exactly are they open to?
The options are very clear. There's the deal. We need to commit to the Good Friday Agreement. We're not letting our Irish friends alone in this. So there's the option of this deal or staying in the EU. I think what we need is time. We have 23 days left. So we would need to talk about an extension to have a referendum or a general elections to get this clarity, because no one can want a no deal in 23 days.
But when you talk about Irish friends, but hasn't the problem potentially been in Brussels is that you've listened far too much to the Irish friends in Dublin and not enough to unionists in Northern Ireland? Because that is their concern, is that essentially you're dividing off Great Britain from the rest of Northern Ireland. And that's not acceptable. That wouldn't be acceptable for the European Union to have more of a say over Bavaria than the rest of Germany, and for Berlin to say, well, that's fine with us.
Well, the issue is that the Northern Irish people as well don't want to be split in this situation. And that is what the backstop is meant for, that they're not put into a situation that it is risking the peace in the country, that it's risking the future of the people on both Irish parts of the island.
I should add that Simon Coveney, the Irish Foreign Minister, in response to Donald Tusk's pretty fiery tweet, must be said that he said it's hard to disagree, reflects the frustration across the European Union and the enormity of what's at stake for us all. All I would add, you know, given what we heard from Downing Street last night through senior sources, who we think was the most senior advisor to Boris Johnson, is that, I mean, the European Union is taking a bit of a gamble here, because Boris Johnson's going up in the polls. If there is an election after an extension happens and he and his party win a majority, it's pretty clear from what we've heard that the UK is not going to come back to the negotiating table.
No.
If they win a majority, he's going to leave without a deal. So they're essentially taking this gamble in the hope, which Dublin and Brussels are doing to a degree, that an election's going to change things, and you might see a softer form of Brexit or a second referendum. It could go the other way, and essentially a Boris Johnson Prime Minister with a majority leaves without a deal in a couple of months' time.
But then there's so will he ask for an extension? Are you confident that he will?
Well, I don't think he'll break the law, even though he said we're getting out by 31st of October. He's setting himself up clearly for it was their fault, not my fault. I've tried everything I can. The European Union's been intransigent. The Irish Taoiseach is also pitting himself against us. I can't do anything. Extension's going to be there, then a general election will be called. And it's interesting, they have made a lot of preparations for no deal. This morning we had the tariff schedule that came out, which said that 88% by value would be at zero tariff.
Right.
So we're making great strides on that front. So from what I can perceive, I think we're heading towards a no deal.
All right, well,
but with a general election to back it.
And the big question is, will Boris turn up next week? Will the British Prime Minister come to the EU
and he has to write the letter.
Well, but because he would argue, if there's going to be no deal, what's the point?
Okay, last word, Svenja.
You call it gambling. I call it responsible leadership. It's in the interest of UK and the EU to avoid a no deal.
If through this process there is no deal, it is a consequence and a result of and a failure of both Brussels and London.
Okay, this story is definitely going to continue until the summit. We won't, as Darren said, will Boris Johnson actually be in Brussels for that? We'll see. All right, now from the UK, let's turn to Sweden, where some members of the royal family woke up to some disappointing news. Let's take a look.
Welcome to Sweden, one of several constitutional monarchies in Europe. Reigning over the kingdom, King Carl Gustaf and his family. But his royal household is about to get a little smaller. The king today stripping 5 of his grandchildren of their Royal Highness status. The children will still remain members of the royal family, but now won't be expected to carry out royal duties and, crucially, won't pocket taxpayer money. It comes as the Duke and Duchess of Sussex in Britain decide that their newborn wouldn't receive a royal title. A sign, perhaps, that Europe's royals are adapting to the modern world.
I mean, the crux of this matter is taxpayers' money, isn't it? So is this a good thing? Good thing?
Well, Robert went to the wedding, so
I know,
he should know anything about the waste of taxpayers' money.
I declare an interest in attending Christopher and Madeleine's wedding. Yeah, I mean, it was a splendid affair, actually. No expenses spared on that particular
a lot of taxpayers' money there.
But no, my view is, direct to the throne, they clearly have a role. But children and grandchildren, the second or third in line to throne, and their grandchildren should...
So maybe other monarchies should be following this example.
If you look at Harry and Meghan, I mean, there's a payoff where they're clearly now really frustrated about the press intrusion into their lives. One would question, well, if they were to give up their royal titles, maybe the press might leave them alone.
All right. OK, let's leave it there. Let's move to Hong Kong now, where Chief Executive Carrie Lam has refused to rule out Chinese intervention for help in tackling the violent protests in the city. Alex Morgan in The Cube has all the latest on this. Alex.
Well, Tessa, these were the comments made by Carrie Lam to news cameras here, saying if the situation becomes so bad, then no options can be ruled out if we want Hong Kong to at least have another chance. That was in answer to the question of, will China intervene? Now, for many people, this comment, it wasn't all that surprising, despite the fact, of course, that this is perhaps the closest Carrie Lam's come to acknowledging one day she might be pushed, in her view, to call on Beijing. Many people saying, well, having just come back from the People's Republic of China, it seems Carrie Lam would be, the connection between Carrie Lam and Beijing might be clear. But I think the real social story, the real story people are talking about today is this story about the outward-looking nature of the Hong Kong protests. Let's not forget leading people like Joshua Wong here, calling for support for a Western-based campaign. They've always, these demonstrators, been asking the West for recognition, for support in their motives. And therefore, it becomes very complicated for Western companies with business interests in China to seemingly stay out of it. Let me just bring you in, well, starting with the NBA. Let's not forget, big basketball fans in China. Well, the Houston Rockets here, their general manager tweeting this, a controversial tweet since deleted, saying, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." Now, that led to effectively a distancing statement from the NBA, saying we recognise these statements might be offensive. The NBA then getting in a lot of hot water with critics in the West saying, which side are you on? Who are you standing with here? They then had to issue a clarification statement saying, no, with the NBA, we stand with freedom of speech. And it's not just traditional sports, it's esports. Let me show you perhaps one of the most controversial elements involving a game called Hearthstone. Well, a player on there donned a mask and shouted pro-Hong Kong slogans there. That game is developed by Blizzard, a Western company, yes, but with big business interests in China. They stripped this player of his winnings, banned him for a year, causing a lot of controversy, including leading to some councillors in Hong Kong saying it's another Western company kowtowing to Beijing. I asked games journalist Tom from Iveng Global, they cover e-sport, I asked him how significant Western business interests on this particular point are in China. This is what he told me.
China's market is huge. I don't think people in the West realize how big the Chinese gaming market is. It's absolutely massive. And especially Western companies, Western publishers are beloved in China. They eat everything companies like Blizzard, Riot Games publish because they are so famous.
So as you can see very clearly, a very difficult situation with a lot of Western companies getting drawn into this, but the Hong Kong protesters themselves still wanting that recognition and the support from people like the NBA, from esports developers too.
Right, thanks for that, Alex, and our team in the Cube. But Svenja, I'll ask you, I mean, the common consensus and in analysis still is that China doesn't have really that impetus or that motivation to go in, and Hong Kong will have to ask for their help anyway. But now that Carrie Lam said it's not ruled out, what do you think the EU should be doing in this scenario?
I also think the EU should never leave people that are struggling to get freedom and democracy alone. I think the EU should always stand with those people.
But to do what? How? In what way?
Just in the hearing with Ms. Vestager today, it was about how can we come to an eye-level field with China. And of course, we won't have business interests in China, but we should stand up for human rights as well. And this needs to go together. And we have the power to negotiate with China because we have shared interests, but this should never be at the sake of human rights.
All right. And coming up on Raw Politics, Turkey prepares for military action in Syria. Could it put Europeans at risk? Plus, true to form, Vladimir Putin celebrates his birthday in the Siberian wilderness. That's in tonight's Raw Moment. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, Turkey says preparations to invade Syria are complete, despite Donald Trump threatening to, quote, obliterate its economy if it does anything, quote, off limits. Now, it comes as the U.S. president ordered troops out of Syria over the weekend. As 2 U.S. military units began withdrawing from the border, Turkish forces prepared to move in. Well, their president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, has threatened a military operation across the border for months, seeing Syrian Kurdish forces as a threat to his country's security. But despite some calling the U.S. withdrawal a green light to Turkey, President Trump defended his decision, saying it was time to let others figure the situation out.
I was going to do this 9 months ago, and we were not at 100%, but we were pretty close. Everyone said, can we get to 100%? Now I get to 100%, and they say, well, maybe we could stay longer. I say, well, when do we get out? There's got to be a time we get out. We have to bring our people back home. Now it's time for Germany and France and all of the nations where they came from to take them back. And they chose no, and maybe they'll change. Maybe they're going to change their tune now. I don't know.
Well, joining us to discuss this is Shada Islam, Director of Europe and Geopolitics at Friends of Europe. And still with us, Robert Rowland from the Brexit Party and our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. I mean, the EU has reacted to this as well. I mean, seeing as this could be a potential threat to the security of the bloc and saying that, warranted any Turkish offensive in northern Syria, it would undermine current efforts to get peace underway. It should be under the UN. Can the EU really do something about this? Should they be doing more, in fact?
They should be doing more, but Tessa, the thing is they were not told, they were not notified, they were given no prior warning that this was going to happen. Donald Trump did not consult, not even his own party, his own aides, not even the European Union. So there has to be some kind of alert, a notification for people to get moving, get a strategy, start working. The European Union is going to be in a very difficult situation because, they have been trying to get some kind of stability in the region, to try and bring some peace talks. Very difficult. They've tried. So that's off the table now for the moment. Relationship between the US and Europe is tense and bad at the moment, as we know, and with Turkey as well. It's very volatile. I mean, Erdogan has turned into the gatekeeper for refugees and migrants coming to the European Union. So we find ourselves in Europe in a very, very difficult situation. Because you say that unprepared.
Unprepared, exactly. And it's not just the European Union. It's also even the government, the US government, the Republican Party in the US were surprised. What do you think is behind Trump's decision? It is, if we remember, a key election promise that he said, I'm bringing the troops back home. Is that what's coming into play here? What is he doing?
Well, there's a sort of bipolarity in his foreign policy, because on the one hand, he's trying to do everything that Obama, didn't do, which was obviously withdraw this idea of nation building and getting our troops back. He obviously has secured a victory against ISIS. That's definitely a tick in the box for him. He is impatient, we know that. But the bipolarity exists because Turkey, don't forget, is a member of NATO. And that is crucial because those bases are essential. So I don't think that he can afford to be too aggressive with Erdogan. We've noticed that both 2 allies of his, Lindsey Graham, Senator of North Carolina, and obviously Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Senate, have both told him to pedal back, if you like. So I actually think that the chances of him pedaling back and keeping those, it's only 50 special forces apparently, but they're probably valuable assets. I think the chance of them keeping them there are very high.
Right.
It must be, I mean, from our colleagues at NBC saying so far no US troops have left Syria or leaving. They're not packing. They haven't received orders to pack.
They're waiting for orders.
From, it must be said, anonymous sources, but to our NBC colleagues. And we did see Trump roll back on this 9 months ago. He's clearly come under an awful lot of pressure domestically within his own political party, very publicly as well. Can he row back on this? Right. Just to add to it, though, I mean, does he kind of have a point? So here we are, sitting in Western Europe, relying on Kurdish forces and, to a degree, the Americans, to help prevent another refugee crisis, potentially the regrowth of IS. It does get to a point where, France, Germany, Britain, if they want to prevent that from happening, they do also have to either, act up, put boots on the ground, do something rather than just moaning about the fact that it's out of their hands.
Okay. So before we flesh out this conversation, let us get reaction from France, in fact, because critics of the U.S. pullout say that a Turkish offensive could strengthen the Islamic State and could even lead to the release of thousands of ex-IS fighters. You mentioned a victory against IS, but then there are still concerns, surely, of pockets of it still existing. So our correspondent, Annelise Borges, she was in Syria earlier this year. She's joining me now from Paris. Annelise, walk us through first the reaction of France, because it has been one of the strongest reaction that we've seen so far to Trump's decision.
Absolutely, Tessa. Well, France says it is, quote, deeply concerned by reports of a possible unilateral military action by Turkey in northeastern Syria, and has called on Turkey to avoid, quote, an initiative that would go against the interests of the global coalition against Daesh, of which Turkey is a part. France's Foreign Affairs Ministry answered our request for a reaction, saying that any unilateral action could have significant consequences and would undermine the efforts made by the coalition in its fight against terrorism. France recognizes that Daesh remains a significant threat to its national security, and it remains a capable group in the region, a group with significant capabilities in northeastern Syria. France says it is in close contact with other European nations and with its other partners in this fight against Daesh, among the global coalition against Daesh. But meanwhile, another partner of France has also reacted. The German government has spoken. A spokesperson of the German government has reacted, saying that such a military intervention would lead to further escalation and contribute to a continued destabilization of Syria.
So obviously there are wider implications here for the EU, for the region, in terms of stability and security. So can you tell me exactly what's at stake?
Well, there's a lot at stake, Tessa. For the wider world, the consequences of a unilateral military intervention there could go far beyond potentially strained diplomatic ties. And that is because the thousands of foreign nationals that are currently being detained by Kurdish forces. These are foreign fighters who had joined and fought alongside ISIS ranks, and their families with perceived or actual associations with ISIS currently being detained in Kurdish-run camps. I visited those camps and those detention facilities back in August, and I also spoke to the region's top foreign affairs negotiator, who described to me what a military intervention by Turkey that was at that time already threatening to enter northeastern Syria would mean.
برزگریکا سوری نهاتی چرا اثر کردن. امروز جانت بن گفت تهدیدات ترکی دنا. ترکی ایش عبر سروی منطقه و شرک چه ببی. تبلیغ هویک چه ببی فوضى چه ببی. و به چند سکش بواقتی گاهش. واقتین چتین داعش کوش کرتیکه خوب باز بدن. و به چند سکش بو خاطری افجون زاروکش باز بدن.
When we spoke back in August, Abdul Karim Omer told me, where do you think all these people will go? Well, they will try to go back to their countries, and that is why this is everyone's problems. Now, meanwhile, these Kurdish officials and the Kurdish people alike are all very concerned about Trump's decision and Trump's announcement to remove troops. Meanwhile, we've heard from the U.S. president in the last few hours, Donald Trump tweeted that it's not because the U.S. is in the process of leaving Syria that they are going to, quote, abandon the Kurds, who are, and I quote, special people and wonderful fighters. We are helping the Kurds financially with weapons. Now, it's going to be very hard to believe in those words for the Kurdish population. Of course, we, over the last few days, have been talking to people on the ground who have been saying many families are so scared that they have already started to relocate, to move out of the northeast part of Syria, while others are already preparing for a fight.
All right, thank you for that, Annelise Borges there, who was recently in Syria, and you saw firsthand what's going on there. Thank you. So just bringing, what Annelise was saying there, the security and stability of Europe being at stake here, asking the European Union for help. And to Darren's point earlier, then why not help in more tangible terms?
So, first of all, I think, Robert, IS is not defeated. I think, this is Trump once again calling victory when there isn't one. I mean, they're there, they're across the region, in Africa, parts of Asia, so there will be a resurgence of that. Secondly, the foreign fighters as well. I mean, that's where the European Union does have an important role to play. And at the moment, it's complete chaos and confusion within the EU ranks on how you deal with it. Some countries say keep them there, they're their problem, they can't come back. The UK is stripping them of their citizenship. Some are saying let's set up a tribunal. Some are saying no, bring them back, re-educate them, keep them under supervision, de-radicalize. I think we have to sort this out. And then, of course, as you said, Tessa, there is the issue of the refugees as well, because Turkey is the gatekeeper. So we're facing a real problem. I don't think, and that's my point, that boots on the ground, sending soldiers to the region will defeat or have success on these problems. These are the main challenges we face. You cannot destroy terrorists through military action. We're seeing that. And my last point, really, is if you bring Russia in, it's going to come in even more than it has before. Iran's going to become part of the equation as well. We have a real explosive situation there.
Just to add context to what you were saying about the refugees. So there's, on one hand, there are the foreign fighters that Annelies was talking about, and the dangers that you brought up. And then today, the interior ministers are discussing that voluntary plan that they, I think it's Germany, France, Italy, and Malta wants to get support for, this voluntary relocation program. That, again, will come into question and probably be impacted.
Yeah, and
here we go again.
And of course, the problem is that we're already starting to see Kurdish people on the move already for fear about potentially what will happen next. Second of all, on the Islamic State and its role in parts of Syria, you talk to anyone who's actually on the ground, they suggest that on the territory that the Syrian government have taken back, many of the troops lock themselves in to their barracks, and that actually in the day-to-day reality of things, the Islamic State are actually effectively running still parts of Syria, even though they don't actually have control. In addition to the refugee and the wider European question is, the Turkey deal is just about holding. We're again starting to see quite a large number of refugees going across the Aegean into Greece. To almost crisis levels now again. And in those circumstances, the last thing the European Union need is not just a deal to distribute refugees, but also to try and help make sure that they don't arrive in Europe in the first place.
All right, before we move on, very quickly, Robert, I want to know where you stand, because Darren was suggesting, what about military from the EU? Shada said no boots on the ground. What's your take on that?
I mean, Ursula von der Leyen has declared a new budget for defence and security. This has to be part of it. I assume that and in the defence brief we went to last week, talked about military integration, i.e. taking assets away from NATO and collectively bringing them within the European Union.
So a common defence system.
A common defence system and a foreign policy, which obviously fits in with the immigration, which is so important for countries like Greece and Hungary and obviously Germany.
Common EU solution, yet again, on a very difficult topic. Okay. Let's move on now and turn to Catalonia, where the debate over independence continues to rage. Its presence even felt on the balconies of Barcelona. Let's take a look.
Split down the middle. Exactly 2 years since Catalonia's failed independence bid, the issue is far from settled, with the balconies of Barcelona finding themselves on the front line of the region's existential question. Over the last 2 years, Catalans have been making their views clear by flying flags from their windows and balconies, but perhaps not for much longer. Authorities there revealing that an increasing number of property owners are putting rules in place to stop tenants hanging flags from their flats. A restriction on the freedom of expression, say critics, but with the region bracing for the trial of 12 separatist leaders and Spanish elections just around the corner, Barcelona's balcony battles look set to continue.
What would you do, Darren? Would you not hang a flag if your landlord told you to?
I think, first of all, it's a reminder, and you can't forget this, just how divisive the issue of Catalan independence still is, not just in Catalonia, but indeed in Spain as well. When it comes to flying flags, it is a flag. It's not an offensive flag to anyone in the sense that it does represent an entity. And no, I don't think a landlord should be able to tell you that. Where would it end?
So we'll see a flag on Darren's balcony then. OK, coming up.
Not for which side, though?
Coming up on Raw Politics.
A neutral flag.
Fighting hate speech. We talk to a new Polish MEP, Magdalena Adamowicz, as part of our special In Profile series after the break. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Magdalena Adamowicz didn't plan on becoming an MEP, but she was driven to stand when tragedy struck her family. And now she wants to deliver a message of hope, not hate. Let's take a look.
Meet Magdalena Adamowicz, a lawyer, academic, and first-time MEP from Poland, with a mission to fight hate speech and an all-too-personal motivation. January 2019, a man rushes the stage at a charity event, stabbing and killing Gdańsk's mayor, Magdalena's husband, Paweł Adamowicz. Coming after months of rising tensions in Poland on the right and the left, Paweł Adamowicz was known for defending the rights of immigrants, LGBT people, and other minorities. In the aftermath of tragedy, with no previous political ambitions, Magdalena Adamowicz decided to run for the European Parliament. And won easily. Now an independent MEP sitting with the European People's Party, she's championing the same causes as her husband, supporting refugees and the rights of LGBT people, and vowing to end hate speech in Europe. So we're here in the center of Brussels, in the heart of the LGBT quarter, and we're about to meet first-time MEP from Poland, Magdalena Adamowicz, is waiting for us right here. Magdalena, it's so good to see you. Thank you for being on the program. All right, let's head inside and have a little chat.
Okay. Hello.
Why did you become a politician?
Well, it was not my aim, the aim of my career in my life. So I have my different profession. I'm a lawyer, I'm academic, I work at the university. My husband, who was a mayor of the city of Gdańsk for over 20 years, and he was very open, very tolerant. He was fighting for democracy and for freedom, which in Poland is now in question. He was killed this January during the big national event, in front of cameras, in front of thousands of people being there. After that, I decided not to sit at home and cry. I decided to start an international campaign, which is, well, imagine there is no hate. At the same time, there were elections for European Parliament, so many friends and families and some other politicians supported me and told me you have to run because from Brussels your campaign, your voice would be more hearable around Europe, around the world.
Why is acceptance of LGBT people, the community in Poland, so low? Where is it coming from?
Our governing party is against the LGBT movement. Always before election they want to find some common enemy. So 4 years ago, before election, it was migrants, and now it's LGBT. So the leaders of the party and some leaders in the church, not all the church, threats the people that LGBT can bring diseases, that it can spoil our children.
Who should do something? Who can do something to change?
If you wanted to start some changes, then you have to start from yourself. We have to look at the mirror, everyone, and see, do you use this hate speech and hatred language? Are you like this or no? So if we start from ourselves and then we give good examples and education, then we are able to change the law, to make in the law sanctions.
Is that why you came to Brussels? So
yes.
Why? What do you want to do in Brussels?
Yes, so as an MEP, we have possibility to make some educational programs. So I already apply for a pilot project regarding to hate speech. And in this project, we would like to do researches and analysis how the hate speech is regulated in a different member states.
By the end of your term, in 5 years, what do you hope to have done?
Bringing freedom from hate, knowing that in Poland we have real democracy, that nobody else would have to be killed for democracy and freedom. As my husband, it would be something, you know, it would be successful for me.
Now, coming up on Raw Politics, when it comes to fighting climate change, how far is too far? We talked to a member of Extinction Rebellion about the group's controversial protest tactics. That's up next. Welcome back. Now, Extinction Rebellion kicked off 2 weeks of global protests demanding tough and immediate measures from governments to tackle climate change. Well, protesters caused a major disruption in London, blockading key sites and gluing themselves to railings and roads. Hundreds were arrested, and in Berlin and Paris, demonstrators halted traffic by blocking roads. While in New York, fake blood was dripped over Wall Street, and demonstrators, as they staged a so-called die-in. All right, let's now cross over to our guest now by Extinction Rebellion spokesperson Donica McCarthy. Mr. McCarthy, so, you know, these tactics that we're seeing, it was a global protest that we saw. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, he called the protesters, quote, uncooperative crusties. Are you? I mean, how would you respond to that?
Well, we're a Gandhian movement based on the peaceful teachings of Mahatma Gandhi. And Mahatma Gandhi said, first of all, they ignore you, then they mock you, then they fight you, and then you win. And we think the Prime Minister is mocking us today, and that shows that we're making progress. It shows that he hears us. And there are people all over the world in 60 countries taking action this week, calling on our governments to take urgent action on the climate and ecological emergencies.
All right, so there were people who, you know, we saw them on the street, but then there are also other people who find this kind of tactic that you're employing quite disruptive. I mean, it does stop them from going about their daily lives. I mean, don't you think this kind of strategy would simply just turn people away from you?
Well, I mean, Gandhi was very clear. The protests had to be disruptive for them to succeed. And that the peaceful, non-violent direct action is the only thing now left to us. We've tried democracy, we've tried marches, we've tried petitions. It's very clear that we now need to do mass non-violent direct action across the world to tackle the extraordinary crisis humanity is facing. You know, it's been 30 years since the UN started trying to get an international treaty to bring down climate emissions. Every single year since that treaty was signed, the Kyoto Treaty was signed, emissions have gone up. And across Europe, there's billions of pounds still being spent on subsidies for fossil fuels. So it's clear we need radical action.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Donica McCarthy from the Extinction Rebellion there. And with us to debate about the effectiveness of the protests by this global movement is Manon Aubry, a French MEP with the group of the European United Left, and Herman Tertsch, a Spanish MEP with the European Conservatives and Reformists group, and Darren is back with us. All right, let me start with you, Herman, maybe about this kind of tactic. Do you think that this is something that can be effective? As he was saying, you know, they've tried other means before.
Well, it is effective because we are now in prime time. We are sending all this message. We have little tiny minorities in cities in Europe or all over the world, radical little minorities who are blocking the society of having their normal lives. And it's coercion and it's violence against the people, against the daily life of the people. And these are very tiny little groups who are being magnified by all the TVs, also by Euronews, who is sending that this radical...
So you think it's a minority?
These little radical groups are more or less the main issue today in the news all over the world.
Okay, Manon, you're laughing, smiling.
Yeah. Millions
but what
acquired.
I'm just laughing because I'm thinking about who's radical at the moment, who's impeding people's life. This is climate change. You know, I'm young enough, maybe you're too old for this, but I'm young enough to get to live climate change, to get through it, to get through the consequences, which is, you know, people were forced to leave their country, to leave their village because of climate change. This is our daily life.
So you agree with the manner of what they're doing?
Of course, because, you know, I think it rightly pointed out that they've tried everything. What's the result? Here in the European Parliament, we're still signing free trade agreements. We're still having an agricultural policy that is not designed for climate transition. So this is, are we investing into climate-friendly finance? Are we investing into what we need for the future? The answer is no.
When you hear young people like that, or even see young people on the streets, you know, every Friday, is that a minority? Is that a radical minority for you?
It's a radical minority. There are millions of young people who are pursuing their normal life, who are acting very, very conscious of the environment. We have seen the improvements in the environment all over Europe. Our problem with the environment is not in Europe.
How would you explain the growth of the Green Party in France, in Germany? I was in Austria last week. They did very well there. The Green, to say, clearly voters are increasingly concerned about the environment. Whether you like
they might not protest, but they are voting.
That's for sure. But many of this phenomena are really a mediatic way of bringing it up. I mean, we have seen. All the left is now doing. They have no other agenda.
So do you think the climate's changing? Do you think the climate's changing?
The climate is changing.
And who's causing it?
Who's
causing it?
Who's causing? Well, it depends. I mean, we have.
Well, are you a scientist?
I'm not. Are you a scientist?
No, I'm not. No. But the whole point is that the overwhelming majority of scientists are saying that it's been caused by man. You're not a scientist. I'm not. But the whole point is, don't we have to trust what scientists say?
No, we have not the right, nobody has the right to block normal life of people who are working because they have a specific
So I think you have a problem with the manner, but you're acknowledging. But you're acknowledging that people are voting green.
It's a coercion and it's violence against the people.
Okay.
And all the media,
Jump in, Mano.
all the Western media permanently are agitating with it.
Okay, I'll let Mano respond to what you're saying.
They're very responsible for the hysteria that in great...
So is it hysteria? Is it hysteria? Is it the media?
Extent, the fear.
The
fear and the extent which is being developed.
Let's Mano reply.
I think the hysteria, well, it's about people not letting others speaking, but it's also the hysteria is about, like, keeping the same path. As we are going, it's more than 3 degrees warmer. If the whole world is getting 3 degrees warmer, your life is going to change. Our whole life is going to change. So if we don't take radical action, because governments are not living up to the standards, to the expectations. And the reason why the young generation in particular is going down the streets is because they are going to be the first ones to suffer it. And they want actions, because what we hear from all governments, from my governments in France, is all words.
We're not going, but we run out of time. We're not going to have an agreement right now.
Went to the street for Maoism and for Trotskyism.
Okay, so we'll have to leave it there. I'm sorry, we'll have to leave it there. I think we just have to agree to disagree right now. Okay, let's move on, because now if you are the president of Russia, how do you celebrate your 67th birthday? There's only one way, of course, a hike through the Siberian wilderness. That's tonight's Raw Moment. Would you like to be Putin's photographer there? I mean...
well, he wasn't topless this time, so I think that's probably a good start on that front. I mean, I have to say, it didn't look like the most exciting 67th birthday, but Siberia does look nice, doesn't it?
Yeah, I've been, actually. It's beautiful. Yeah, it is.
Probably the best place to go if climate change happens.
Well,
I was going to book a flight to Siberia, but I better not.
Okay, all right, we've run out of time. Thank you, everyone, for watching us tonight. And do stay with us tomorrow. We'll be back. See you then.